Hello and welcome. This video is for my fellow Seventh-day Adventists who would like to understand where we are in Bible prophecy. But I'm going to be doing something that nobody else has done. I'm going to be finding answers that apply to right now in Revelation chapter 17 and 18. You see, right now, everybody in our church is focusing on Daniel chapter 11 with the King of the North. The problem is that there are a lot of different interpretations on that, and they are very hard to prove, especially when you go down the path of symbolism. So what I'm going to do is present some things that are very clear. You should be able to agree with at least half of what I present here, and then maybe the other half as well. But half is very clear and very easy to back. I'm then going to combine some Ellen White quotes to add more confirmation. So what I'm about to show you is going to completely change the context of everything you are seeing right now in the world. It's going to change the context of Trump, MAGA, this sudden unexpected reversal on globalism that none of us were expecting. I mean, for all of us Adventists, Trump was quite a curveball. We had witnessed 3-4 decades of trending towards globalism, digital currencies, global currencies, global agencies, and a increase of censorship and a slow limiting of our religious freedoms and, of course, freedom of speech. Then all of a sudden, Donald Trump comes along and slams the brakes on all of this, and it's beginning to have a global effect as he starts to dial back all the progress that we saw Satan accomplish over the last 30, 40 years. So the question is this too good to be true? Is this part of Satan's trick? Well, Adventism is being ripped apart by this very question. I would say that this has divided Adventism into 3 basic groups. We have group 1, which really never wanted anything to do with Walter White or any conspiracy theories, don't particularly like studying Revelation all that much, and just typically believe what is on the news, and they always will. Then you have the Walter White crowd that believes that Satan controls everything, no matter what you choose, what politician you choose, it's the devil in red or the devil in blue. And that would mean that Trump is the devil in red. Then you have a third group that believes that what is going on right now is genuine and God is offering us a way of escape. That Trump may or may not be a good guy, but he's bringing us something good and it's not a trap. The trap is down the road. So, question, as I read through these 3 groups, did you get upset? Did you feel tense? Did you feel judged? I bet you did. Because right now, this topic is causing major problems in our church. These 3 groups are at complete loggerheads, and there is nothing foreseeable that is going to solve this division. And I believe that this division is largely to blame for some very troubling statistics in the North American division as of late. For example, it's speculated that we are losing as many members as we are baptizing. But the more troubling statistic is that church attendance compared with membership is the lowest of any division, 15%. So what are those other 85% doing? Are they attending church sometimes? Have they lost interest in church due to this division? Or have they quit going to church and just not gotten around to removing their membership? We don't know. There aren't any statistics on that. But that should be very troubling to you, and it is to me. And that is why I'm making this video. I believe this is how God showed me to not only reverse this trend, not only to get us back on course, but to help show the church our true mission for the phase of prophecy that we are living in. Okay, enough preamble, let's get right into it. As we all know, America is the 2-horned beast, and it lends its authority to the harlot. The question is that happening now? Are there any steps during this transition? How do we get from A to B? And is there a special role for us during this period? Well, what I'm going to show you is that Revelation 17 and 18 give us these vital clues. And then when you go to Ellen White, you get specific counsel for this phase. That's right. Ellen White has specific counsels for different phases of the end times. So if you don't know which phase she's referring to, and you don't know which phase you're in, you will take her out of context. All right, let's get right to Revelation chapter 17. 17 verse 16 says, "And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled." So this first point is very important, and it's very clear. The 10 horns support the harlot, and then they stop supporting the harlot, and they destroy her. Clear? So this means that the 10 horns are very powerful. There's nothing the harlot can do to defend herself from the 10 horns. So ask yourself, what is the power structure of the world going to be at this time? Are there other kings, other armies? Do the 10 kings absorb all the kingdoms of the world? Do they replace them? Or are they 10 new kings that never existed before? Well, Revelation 18 answers this. 18:9, "The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come." So do you see the clue there? The 10 horns do not replace the kings of the world, because the kings of the world are mourning when she's destroyed. So why would those kings mourn and stand at a distance if they were the ones destroying her? That doesn't make sense. So the 10 horns do not replace the kings of the world. They are new. The rest of the kings are still there. This then begs a very important question. These kings are mourning, which indicates that they are sad that the harlot was destroyed. That would mean that if they could have protected her, they would have. But they couldn't. Their only course of action was to stand at a distance and say, hey, we're over here, don't hurt us. So what does this tell you about the power structure of the world? The 10 horns are supremely powerful. They are more powerful than all the militaries of the world combined by far. So with that in mind, do you see the significance here when it says the 10 horns lend their power and authority to the beast? This power being referenced is a military power that is supreme, and the authority means they are allowing the harlot and the beast to command them. But before I continue, I need to solve a little problem between Revelation 17 and 18, and I'm going to rely on Ellen White for this. Now, Ellen White didn't have specific insight on Revelation 17 and 18, but she did show us how to interpret the scriptures. She showed us how to look beneath the surface to harmonize all scripture. What am I talking about? Well, in Revelation 17, it says the 10 horns destroy the harlot. In Revelation 18, it really does sound like God's doing it, that he's going to render her double. Doesn't that sound like God's doing it? So what is going on here is one passage describing an event where the horns destroy her, and chapter 18 describing a different event, or maybe God comes along later on and finishes her off? Are these different events, or are they the same event? Well, according to how Ellen White taught us to interpret the scriptures, they would be the same event. What am I talking about? Well, I'm going to go to the description of the death of King Saul to show you. 1 Corinthians 10:4. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. Sounds pretty clear that Saul killed himself, doesn't it? Then we skip ahead to verse 13, and it says, So Saul died for his unfaithfulness, which he had committed against the Lord, because he did not keep the word of the Lord, and also because he consulted a medium for guidance. But he did not inquire of the Lord, therefore he, as in God, killed him, and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. So you have the same exact event that on one hand, Saul kills himself. On the other hand, God claims he killed Saul. Why? Well, because God takes the blame for what he allows. So what about Revelation 17 and 18? Same exact pattern. First it says how it actually happens. The 10 horns destroy her. Then God is essentially taking the blame in chapter 18. This is a common pattern in the Bible. In fact, if you look at Revelation 7, it says God is holding back the final judgment. Revelation 15 makes it sound like God is sending the 7 last plagues, the final judgment. So which one is it? Are these different plagues, different judgment, or the same judgment with a different context? See, we as Adventists have this advantage where we realize that it can be talking about the same event. Now, regarding chapter 7 and chapter 15, we Adventists are split on that because we are in fact not a cult. So we Adventists are alone in understanding this principle that when God says he sends judgment or does something, he means he allowed people to reap what they sowed. And we understand this because Ellen White opened our eyes to it. Now, here's a really bold claim, but understanding this principle is what has given us Adventists such an advantage in understanding prophecy. I will go so far as to say that it has allowed us to unseal prophecy, that prophecy was sealed up until we understood this very principle. I will then go so far as to say that if you do not understand this principle, you will not be able to understand any of prophecy. So let me ask, were you aware of this principle? Were you aware that this is something that Ellen White taught us? Probably not, because it's a very controversial topic in our church. But follow this passage where Ellen White really clearly lays it out in the simplest terms. I was shown that the judgments of God would not come directly out from the Lord upon them, but in this way. They place themselves beyond his protection. He warns, corrects, reproves, and points out the only path of safety. Then, if those who have been the objects of his special care will follow their own course, independent of the Spirit of God, after repeated warnings, if they choose their own way, then he does not commission his angels to prevent Satan's decided attacks upon them. So this quote from Ellen White and several others are her clarifying quotes. You know how the Bible has clarifying verses? Some verses make it sound like you go to heaven or hell when you die, but then other verses clarify the context of those verses. Same goes for eternal hellfire. There's quite a few verses that make it sound like the lost burn in hell for eternity. Then other verses clarify the context of those verses. Ellen White offered these clarifying quotes so that we could understand all the rest of her quotes. Here's another one. This one here is referring to the second death, or hell. This is not an act of arbitrary power on the part of God. The rejectors of his mercy reap that which they have sown. God is the fountain of life, and when one chooses the service of sin, he separates himself from God, and thus cuts himself off from life. He is alienated from the life of God. Christ says, all they that hate me love death. God gives them existence for a time that they may develop their character and reveal their principles. This accomplished, they receive the results of their own choice. By a life of rebellion, Satan and all who unite with him place themselves so out of harmony with God that his very presence is to them a consuming fire. The glory of him who is love will destroy them. But there's something else that Ellen White helps us to understand in chapter 17. Look at what it says in verse 17. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. So what's the deal here? Are the 10 horns God's remote control? Does he mind control them this entire time? Is this why we can say that God did destroy the harlot in chapter 18 because he mind controlled the 10 horns to destroy her? Well, let's see what Ellen White says regarding this. And to understand that, all we have to do is read what she said about Pharaoh. Now, it's a long quote, and I'm going to read all of it. God destroys no man. Everyone who is destroyed will have destroyed himself. Everyone who stifles the admonitions of conscience is sowing the seeds of unbelief, and these will produce a sure harvest. By rejecting the first warning from God, Pharaoh of old sowed the seeds of obstinacy, and he reaped obstinacy. God did not compel him to disbelieve. The seed of unbelief which he sowed produced a harvest of its own. Thus his resistance continued until he looked upon his devastated land, upon his cold dead form of his firstborn, and of the firstborn of all in his house, and of all the families in his kingdom, until the waters of the sea closed over his horses and his chariots and his men of war. His history is a fearful illustration of the truth of the words that whatever a man soweth, that also shall he reap. You see how vital this is to understand? Because of how the 10 horns are described, they don't exist yet, they exist in the future, and then they're just mind controlled by God, makes them seem so insignificant, something that we can't relate to, so we just kind of approach it with a wait and see. But what I'm going to show you is that the 10 horns are developing right now. And they are not some mindless minions of the future. And when you understand what these are, you will be unlocking so much of what we are witnessing right now. Okay, so on to the next clue. What we can see is that it is apparent that the harlot must do a deal with the muscle in order to rule the world. So now I'm going to ask a hypothetical question, but a very important hypothetical question, which will help us to understand what's going on in the world right now. Do you think that the harlot likes the fact that she has to do a deal with the muscle in order to rule the world? Or would she prefer the 10 horns just not exist in the first place? See, we can tell here that if it wasn't for the 10 horns, she would just be able to rule uncontested. Why do we know this? Because she has all the other kings and merchants of the world committing fornication with her. So if it wasn't for the 10 kings, she would rule uncontested. But because the 10 kings exist, she has to do a deal with them to rule. This is apparent because when they turn on her, they destroy her. That means she needs their permission to rule uncontested. That's just logic. So the harlot must do a deal with the 10 horns in order to rule and be able to say, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and I will not see sorrow. So she has to place her faith in the supreme military might of the world in order to rule. The same military might that will eventually destroy her. Does that remind you of another Bible verse in Revelation? He who lives by the sword must be killed by the sword. Not might be killed by the sword, must be killed by the sword. I call this the rule of ironic judgment. Whatever you place your faith in rather than God becomes your idol, and it ends up destroying you. And it will destroy the harlot. So back to this hypothetical question, which I claimed will give us a huge clue as to what is going on in our world right now. Does the harlot want to destroy the 10 horns before they become the 10 horns? Well, of course he does. Do you think Satan wants to rule for a few years or forever? Well, of course he wants to rule forever. And if he knows the book of Revelation warns that the 10 horns are going to destroy his kingdom, do you think he A, wants to do a deal with them, or B, wants to destroy them before he sets up his kingdom? Well, of course he wants to destroy them. That's just logic. So now we need to figure out, where do these 10 horns come from? We know they are the military might of the world. They act as one mind, which is typical of military. So where did they come from? Did they just go poof and come into existence? Did the military might of the world that is so powerful that it can conquer all other militaries combined just come out of a vacuum? Did it just go poof and exist? Well, that makes no sense. So, although Revelation makes it sound like these 10 horns just came from nowhere, that makes no logical common sense. What is more believable is that they were something else and then they became the 10 horns. So the question is that true? Were they something else that became the 10 horns? And is what they were, does that exist today? So the question then becomes, what were the 10 horns before they become the 10 horns? So let's go on the clues that we have. It's a military power, and it lends its power and authority to the harlot and the beast. Do we know anybody else in Revelation who lends its power to the beast? Well, the lamb-like beast exercises the authority of the first beast. The word exercise is a vague word, so that doesn't really help. But we do know that it causes everybody in the world to worship the first beast. Interesting. Sounds similar to the 10 horns. But what about this line? The whole world followed after the beast and said, "Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with it?" Interesting. So the second beast causes everybody to worship the first beast. And when it's reborn, when its wound is healed, the whole world recognizes its military supremacy. That really hasn't happened anywhere in the past. We have never had a kingdom in the last few thousand years that the whole world combined could not conquer. And that sounds an awful lot like Revelation 17 and 18, doesn't it? So here I am trying to claim that the two-horned beast, America, is the 10 horns, will become the 10 horns. Now that's quite the claim, isn't it? But consider that when we do get to the eighth beast, the new seven-headed, 10-horned beast, which is ridden by the harlot, we don't see America, the lamb-like beast, described anywhere. Where did it go? We just see the same old seven-headed, 10-horned beast with no lamb amalgamated into it. Do you really think that America just goes poof and disappears? We believe that America lends its power and causes everybody to worship the beast. So it can't disappear. The only plausible explanation is that it changes forms. So again, back to the hypothetical question. If the harlot could, would she destroy America before America becomes the 10 horns? Well, one thing most Adventist prophecy buffs can agree on is that the Catholic Church has been working very hard to destroy America for the last 100 years. And if you are a studious Adventist, you should know this. And if you are a studious Adventist, you would also be aware that the Catholic Church was very close to completing its goal of imploding America right before Donald Trump hijacked the Republican Party for the specific purpose of saving America. And interestingly enough, Trump has been all about making America's military more powerful than it's ever been before. Also, the Department of Defense has been renamed the Department of War by Trump, has something called the Combatant Command. It's 11 different divisions of the Department of War. Not 10, but 11. So is it a fulfillment of prophecy? I wouldn't go that far, but I would say it's something to keep our eye on. So to recap, so far I've made a very solid case that the 10 horns are not a side note, but they're something very important to understand in Revelation, and they offer us a lot of clues as to what is going on right now. But have I made a solid case that America becomes the 10 horns? I wouldn't say solid. But there are more clues in that confusing prophecy that says 5 kings were, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. And when he comes, he remains a short time. And then there is the 8th, and the 8th is of the 7, which means that the 8th is reborn from one of the previous 7. So what I'm going to do now is build a case that America, or MAGA, is kingdom number 7. So in case you aren't aware, our church takes no official position on this passage. Now, there is a consensus that the first 5 represent Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and Catholicism. Where people differ is on kingdoms 6 and 7. Some people believe they are Russia, atheism, then maybe Protestant America. Some parallel them to Daniel 11, the king of the north and king of the south, and stuff like that. What I'm going to do is present something unique, that America, the 2-horned beast, is kingdom 6 and 7. But hold on here. Don't the 2 horns on the lamb-like beast represent the separation of church and state? Well, yes, but I believe that's a very incomplete understanding, so I would like to enlarge on it. Horns represent kings or kingdoms, not the separation of ideologies. But we can still make this prophecy fit if we apply the 2 horns to the 2 parties in America. So the Democrats would be the state party and the Republicans would be the church party. The Democrats don't like the idea of God-given rights. They replace them with state-given privileges. They believe in lots of government control and policies, and they don't particularly like the idea of liberty, and they don't believe in God. They're almost 100% atheist. And then you have the Republican Party, which represents the church, and they believe in God-given rights. They don't believe those can be infringed upon. They believe in we the people should be able to rule, not the state ruling over us. And oddly enough, these 2 parties, these 2 horns, take turns ruling in America every 4 to 8 years. And they're not just slightly different parties like you have in every other country. They are diametrically opposed to each other. But that's only part of what I think this prophecy is warning about. We can all admit that America is a very unique and confusing country. It started with the premise of liberty and freedom of religion. But if you go to Washington, D.C., the design and layout couldn't be more occultic. So what's the deal? Well, from my observation, I believe that America became the trees to the whole world. It became the launching point for evolution, atheism, spiritualism, LGBTQ, Hollywood, and all sorts of other things. While, don't forget, America was the launching pad for the gospel. It sent missionaries all around the world. Most of the mission work in the world was done, paid for, and based out of America. And lest we forget, God chose America to be the launching point of the three angels' messages and the Adventist Church. See, you can go online and watch hours and hours of videos on how occultic and satanic the design of Washington, D.C. is. But the idea that they infer is that nothing good can come out of America. That limits God more than anything else, because we know that God said he can bring all things together for good. So whatever the intentions were of those who designed America, God brought the most amount of good out of America, more good than he has brought out of any country in the world. And what about all the evil that is being propagated from America to the whole world, these two trees? Well, God is not a God of censorship. He placed Satan's tree right in the Garden of Eden. Ellen White says that God allowed Satan to present his case before all of heaven. At great peril, he lost a third of the angels. But God still allowed it. Okay, so the horns, let's just say they represent kings. But how would they be kingdom 6 and 7? That would mean that they would have to rule sequentially. Is that what's happened in America? Well, let's look back at what's happened since 1950 to 2015. The state horn began to dominate. And not only did they dominate America, all the Christian and Protestant world became in perfect lockstep with the doctrines preached by the secular state horn. Every university was preaching evolution, secularism, anti-God, LGBTQ. All these countries were pushing Hollywood liberal ideologies, Western medicine. Everything was anti-God. Okay, so that's one thing, but in order for these two kings to rule sequentially, we would need to see a 180 reversal of everything that the first horn has accomplished. And what are we seeing today? Trump started a global lockstep reversal. Now, it's only partial at this point, but look at what's happening around the world. Let's look at Central and South America. You have Chile, Honduras, Argentina, El Salvador, all voting in conservative style, Republican style heads of state. Then you have Hungary, Romania, Poland, and more. And then you have even some of the most liberal countries in Europe starting to change course. So we are watching a global transition right now, and it's based out of America, the two-horned beast. See, our world is big now. Prophecies aren't that significant if they're just referring to one nation. But the two-horned beast speaks like a dragon. He is affecting the whole world. Remember, eventually he convinces the whole world to follow the first beast. But during Kingdom 6 and 7, America convinced the whole world to become secular. Well, most of it. During the seventh kingdom, MAGA is going to convince the whole world to become more religious in accordance with their ideologies. So, if I'm correct, we are transitioning into kingdoms number 7 right now. Now, how many questions does this bring up? in your mind? Well, first off, this idea that the world is all a stage and everybody is puppets and controlled opposition, that does not jive with prophecy. And if you watch Trump's rise to power, it just doesn't add up that this was all a game. From the moment Trump announced his candidacy, Kingdom 6 attacked him. The media, Hollywood, all the experts, the same people who were attacking us were now attacking Trump. Then when he became president, we had these failed impeachment attempts. Then as soon as they failed, we had COVID, coincidentally spread to the whole world, which allowed the Democrats to use mail-in voting, which led to a very suspicious 2020 election. Then as soon as Trump announced his candidacy for 2024, all these attempts came to throw him in jail and end his life. Does this really look like a game to you? It certainly doesn't to me. And the Bible indicates that this war that we're watching between these two horns is real. It has massive implications. Millions of people will suffer and die as a result of who wins between these two horns. Another really important point is that the Bible doesn't say anything positive or negative about Kingdom 7. It does, however, warn us about Kingdom 8. And then it warns us that Kingdom 7 will be deceived by the Antichrist by signs and wonders to lend its authority and establish the first beast, or the eighth beast. So the next important thing to understand is that we aren't moving to Kingdom 8 yet. That seems to be the consensus in Adventism today, but we are instead moving into Kingdom 7. So the question is, how long does Kingdom 7 last? Well, it says it lasts a short space. Well, what does that mean? Well, I have bad news, but that is one of the most vague terms in the Bible regarding time. It can refer to a few moments, a lifetime, a few years, and even the amount of time that after Satan was kicked out of heaven. He knew his time was short. So what can we draw from this word? Well, when you look at the uses, a lifetime is being compared with all of eternity. Satan's time to deceive us after he's kicked out of heaven is being compared to all of eternity, all of human history, and all of his lifespan. So what it means is it's a smaller amount of time in comparison. So that means the seventh kingdom will rule for a less amount of time when compared to the kingdoms prior to it. Now that's kind of what you expect. So if this interpretation is correct, we would need to see America becoming very powerful like never before in its previous 250 years, because it's not only switching horns, but it's becoming the 10 horns. So let's just say I wasn't surprised at all when Trump was elected and immediately started talking about expansionism, like taking over Canada, Greenland, possibly the Panama Canal, and even Gaza, then waging war on all the drug cartels in Mexico, Central and South America, who were weakening the American people, then ending fraud and rounding up criminals, forcing them to face justice, deporting illegals who were not contributing to the country, then even denaturalizing legal immigrants who aren't contributing to the country. America is shifting its purpose from supporting the world to becoming the ultimate world power. And that's why when I hear Trump talk big, I don't think he's joking. I see it as a fulfillment of prophecy. So if what I'm telling you is upsetting you because you don't like Trump or you don't like the direction that things are going, you need to look past that and understand that this oligos or short time that we are entering is go time for us Adventist people. It is the time that we were designed for. MAGA is literally paving the way for us to finish the work. In fact, this is our last chance to finish the work. They are ending censorship all around the world. They are taking out Muslim terrorists who are persecuting our missionaries, and they are going to continue to do this. MAGA, Make America Healthy Again, is going to be more conducive to the Adventist health message than the previous horn that treated us like we were all a bunch of quacks. Now, the other main reason I believe we are moving to kingdom number 7 and not number 8 is because we aren't ready. Now, I know that's a critical, divisive thing to say, but I'm basing it on two things. Ellen White said that we need to pursue the latter rain. It would not come to those of us who waited around for it. There are a lot of quotes about this. I'm not going to read it. So the question is our church pursuing the latter rain right now? Well, I've heard a lot of really good sermons about this, and there's a lot of good books out there. There's only one problem. Let's see what the Bible says the latter rain is. And it shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. And on my menservants and on my maidservants I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they shall prophesy. So the latter rain is clearly the gift of prophecy. I don't see any way around that, do you? So then, how many sermons have you heard about how we should be pursuing the gift of prophecy? Or instead, do you hear about how we've been given everything we need and we just need to scour that for all the answers? Here's the problem with that. If Ellen White continually told us to pursue the latter rain, which is the gift of prophecy, then what would that mean? That she was a prophet, but she was not the fulfillment of the spirit of testimony in Revelation. She was a fulfillment of it, but not the fulfillment of it. So more specifically, Ellen White was like the John the Baptist to the latter rain. She was making straight the way. She was showing us the path, how we could get from where they were in the 1800s to this most vital step in prophecy. And if you're having trouble with this, consider this. If we had all the answers we needed from Ellen White, then why would there be this great outpouring of the latter rain, which is the gift of prophecy? And why would Ellen White herself be telling us that we need to pursue the gift of prophecy? And also, from her description, it sounds like the outpouring will massively dwarf what she gave us. And I'm seeing that from the Bible as well. So here we are, over 120 years later after her death, and we are not doing what she told us. But what's worse is we aren't even trying. Now, I don't mean to sound divisive, because I myself have no divine revelation. I have not been given the gift of prophecy. Everything you're hearing from me is the result of much study and discernment. I've spent 30 years researching prophecy. At one point, I memorized most of the book of Revelation and all the other verses on prophecy. But at the end of the day, I have no divine revelation. I'm just doing the best I can do without it. But you know what? Neither has anybody else that you're listening to. Nobody you're listening to has any divine revelation. They're all relying on their research and study, and then studying the divine revelation from Ellen White, which she herself says will not be enough to get you through the last days. So here we are at a precipice, because look at the state of our church right now. As I said, the statistics are troubling. It's being ripped apart. During COVID, we tried to take the most non-controversial stance possible, that the vaccine was not a moral choice. Just go home and pray about it. Which sounds nice, but would you tell your members to go home and pray about whether they should snort cocaine or not? According to some experts, taking the vaccine would save your life. According to other experts, taking the vaccine would cost you your life. More consequential choice than snorting cocaine. But it wasn't a moral choice somehow. When I asked Adventists around North America whether they prayed to get an answer regarding the vaccine, I never found one person who did. The closest they came was asking God to bless the choice that they were going to make based on their research and discernment. That's how much we've lowered the bar. And do you think that this strategy is going to get us to the last great deception? COVID was an amazing opportunity for us to become less divided. We could have come together and prayed and fasted and said, we're waiting on the Lord till we get an answer. We need an answer. Is the answer A? Is it B? Or is it C, D, E, or F? God always provides a way of escape. Instead, we came away divided and disillusioned. So what is the way forward for us? Everything is becoming divisive and controversial. When you look at Ellen White's quotes on why we should avoid politics, she wanted us to not get distracted and cause division in our church. She didn't want us to try to theorize what was going on. Well, she's right. We shouldn't be theorizing and relying on discernment. We should be praying for God to give us discernment. And in her day, politics was a distraction. Today, politics has bombarded our life. There is no way we can avoid it. And it is not just an agree to disagree situation. Politics is having a massive impact on many aspects of our life and even our religious liberty. So is the answer for us to avoid all controversy? Boy, honestly, I wish it was, because life would be easy. But look at the result. Nobody's talking about us anymore. We've become irrelevant. The only reason people talk about the Sabbath now is because Charlie Kirk brought it up. The only reason people are talking about eternal hellfire right now is because Kirk Cameron brought it up. Nobody's talking about us. Are we salt that's lost its flavor? Have we tried to become so non-controversial that we are irrelevant now? So do you see it? We are completely cornered right now. We either continue on our path of being non-controversial, staying out of politics and everything else controversial, or we pursue the latter rain. And then if God gives us something political to say, it will be something he wants us to say for the purpose of saving lives here and for heaven. When we dream dreams, have visions, and prophesy, a large percentage of that could end up being political. We are told we're going to be speaking prophetic messages directly to kings and magistrates. If there are natural disasters, earthquakes, we need to be given divine revelation so we can warn people, just like Ellen White warned people about the San Francisco earthquake. If there's a new pandemic, we need revelation from God as to how best to treat it. What if there's no human cure? If there is a war or a rumor of war, we need divine revelation so that we can know which it is. Because we don't want to get caught up in the war. How many poor Ukrainian Christians and Adventists got caught up in that Ukrainian war? Did God want them there? Well, we don't know, because nobody got a divine revelation. What if thousands or millions of lives could have been saved had we had divine revelation and people listened to us? What if we could have saved thousands or millions of lives during COVID because we had divine revelation and direction from God instead of just trusting secular experts? And what about the future? We are told that there will be deception so great that they will deceive the very elect. The reason they won't be deceived? Divine revelation, the spirit of prophecy. So what chance does the rest of the world have to make a choice for good or for evil if they don't hear our divine revelation? Millions of lives will be depending on us. Now, to help you understand all this better, let's go to the life of the greatest prophet in the Old Testament. In my opinion, that was Daniel. Now, what did Daniel do for a living? Well, he was chief advisor to the most powerful kings in human history. Now, what's important to understand is that that position was the most powerful position in the kingdom because they had the king's ear. They could influence the most powerful person in the world. And why do you think the kings valued Daniel to put him in that position? Well, because he was a prophet. He would have been giving them divine revelation, not just human discernment. And if you doubt me, what do you think Daniel was praying about so many times a day? He was living a very complicated life. There were not black and white, simple decisions to be made. He was trying to offer advice to some of the most wicked people in human history. And for some reason, they valued that advice. And they would contrast it with what the secular advisors were saying. And the secular advisors hated Daniel for that because obviously the king was mostly going with Daniel's advice. So not only did Daniel keep that position, he really kept it because every time a new king came along, they kept Daniel as their chief advisor. And when the Persians conquered the Babylonians, they kept Daniel as their chief advisor. That's incredible when you think about it. And what's interesting is, as wicked as these kings were, you can tell from some of the stories that they loved Daniel. Look at how King Cyrus was up all night praying when Daniel was in the lion's den. What an incredible example for us. And I mean example. Because do you think that God wanted only one Daniel in human history? Or would he prefer to have a Daniel in every king's court? See, Daniel's advice was saving lives, preventing suffering. How many executions and tortures did Daniel prevent through his advice? Well, we don't know. We aren't given any details. But I believe Daniel had an incredibly positive impact on the world around him, even witnessing to these kings. And we need to dare to be a Daniel. So the interesting thing is, if you look at Ellen White's counsel, she would actually rebuke Daniel had he had that position in her day, because she advised against us participating in politics or having political positions. Daniel had the most powerful political position in government, but she didn't have a problem with that. Is that a contradiction? Absolutely not. Because Daniel was relying on divine revelation, and God had put him there. That's the difference. Now, that would have been a great place to end this presentation on such a good note, but I'm deciding to add one more puzzle piece because this will help you to understand what's coming immediately next. This will help you understand how we go from Kingdom 7 to Kingdom 8. And if we're living in the very beginnings of Kingdom 7, that's going to be very important for you to know. In other words, this is what could happen next. Now, the problem is this is a very controversial point. Ellen White alluded to parts of this, but she didn't realize the political implication of what she was saying at the time. She couldn't have known. What I'm going to share is all from Ellen White. And they are quotes that I don't even need to read because I think everybody's familiar with them. It's regarding the cities. What did Ellen White say about the cities? Well, she said they'd become hotbeds of wickedness, that God's people would need to move out. It would be almost impossible for us to do business in the cities near the end times without becoming compromised. She then said, as God's people left, there would be multiple calls for them to leave. The cities would become even more wicked. She said that the only people who should stay behind were those who were doing the Lord's work in the cities. Then, at a certain point, she warned that Satan would be allowed to destroy the cities. He would not destroy them all at once. He would be allowed to destroy a few, which would then allow for a warning to the other cities. She then said that we would need to go out and really focus on warning the city folks before it was too late for them as well. So the same Ellen White, who said we shouldn't get involved in politics, pick sides, said that if somebody employed in the church starts actively supporting one party or the other, they should be removed from their position. That same Ellen White then warned that folks living in the city would become very wicked and that we need to separate ourselves from them unless we're evangelizing to them. So considering that, how do you feel about this voting map in America? In case you aren't aware, the blue dots represent Democrat population concentrations, and they all happen to be directly over cities. Now, that doesn't mean 100% of the Democrats live in cities. So Ellen White wasn't saying 100% of the Democrats are wicked. She was saying everybody who lives in the cities are wicked, whether they're Republican or Democrat. But most of them just happen to be Democrat. And these statistics are not accurate because in the last 8 years, there has been a lot of migration away from Democrat cities by Republicans and moderates and Christians, whatever you want to call them. And many people have moved out of the cities or even the states, Democrat states. So ironically, moderates and Republicans are following the advice of Ellen White without even realizing it. The question is, are you? So am I bringing this up just to be a divisive jerk? No. I'm telling you, this is the puzzle piece that shows us how we get from Kingdom 7 to Kingdom 8 and how we end up with a Sunday law. So stop and think about it. What would happen if 2 or 3 Democrat cities were destroyed, like, say, New York, Detroit, Chicago, Oakland, LA, any one of them? Well, millions more Democrat voters would be killed than Republican. This would be a massive blow to the Democrat Party, one that they would not be able to overcome. This would devastate them to the point that we would essentially have a one-party system in America. But on top of this, there are some serious implications as well. As I've told you, there is a political migration going on. Republicans moving away from Democrat areas and vice versa. More and more people are actually calling for segregation. They want to be away and separate from the other side. And one of the growing talking points is that each side believes that the other side's way of life is self-destructive and they don't want to be around them when they self-destruct. Now, I don't know if this talking point is going to continue, but it's really growing right now. And it's almost like there's a showdown between both sides as to which way of life is better. But according to Ellen White, the Democrats are going to lose this showdown miserably when the cities start getting destroyed. So this will embolden the right to believe that they are on God's good side, which they are to a degree because God didn't allow them to get destroyed. So the question is, how do you think the religious right will respond to the destruction of these first cities? Yes, they will be emboldened by them, but no, they will not react the way some people did on the left by celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. They will be deeply concerned about the welfare of the people living in the remaining cities, and they will want to do everything they can to prevent further destruction. But guess what? Ellen White says that we also need to be evangelizing those remaining cities desperately to warn them to either leave or repent so that further destruction doesn't happen. Ultimately, to save as many lives as possible. So we will be doing the same thing as the religious right, but we will be doing it very differently. And that's where we get our storyline. That's where they start to impose blue laws, religious laws, turn America into a theocracy, maybe start imposing a Sunday law, all for the purpose of preventing further destruction of the cities. So try and imagine what a confusing time this is going to be. Like, I right now am genuinely confused. I see no problem in supporting many of the things that Trump is doing right now because they're saving lives, they're ending wars, they're making people safe. The very same thing will be happening during this phase, but it will be magnified. The government will be scrambling, trying to figure out, how do we prevent the destruction of more cities? We can clearly see that God and Satan are involved here. So what are we going to do? And that's where they end up crossing the line into imposing things like Sunday laws and the mark of the beast, forcing people to follow their theocratic rules in order to save lives. The point? The same point I've been making throughout this presentation. We desperately need this latter rain. If you're finding things confusing now, if you're trying to simplify it by making it black and white so you can navigate through, how do you think you're going to handle the future? Do you think it's going to get less confusing as we move forward? No. And that's why we need this latter rain now. The Bible says it, Ellen White says it, and I hope I've made this point abundantly clear. And if you haven't connected the dots, the 144,000 ties right in with the latter rain. The 144,000 in chapter 7 are called servants. Twice in Revelation it says, my servants, the prophets. There are other verses I could bring in, but the connection between the 144,000 servants and prophets is very clear. That means the 144,000, whether it's a literal or symbolic number, will be prophets. That will be the latter rain.
And it shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out of my Spirit on all flesh, that your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions. Your old men shall dream dreams. And on my men servants and on my maid servants I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they shall prophesy. I will show wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. At that time your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever.